While the say the administrator or the boss is required to have a security clearance, oftentimes personnel below that individual are not required to have security clearance. So imagine if you're on the largest military installation and you're an actor who wants to damage the military, it is quite possible that you could negatively impact that facility. So shutting down the water, shutting down the electrical system, and therefore temporarily paralyzing that base, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So that obviously seems like it could be a problem. Is there something that Congress could be or should be doing about that sort of issue?
Yeah, so as far as the security background checks go, that's one thing. So the biggest challenge that the federal government has right now is that there's an immense backlog. So after the breach that happened 2 or 3 years ago, where I was one of probably tens or hundreds of thousands of people who said, hey, your private data or your private information has been compromised, so other actors internationally could have access to it. The challenge is the backlog. So it's not just ensuring that people do have the proper security clearance on a military installation. That's kind of the easy part. The hard part is, okay, what do we have to do to catch up to the immense backlog that we have? So if it takes between 6 and 18 months to get a security clearance, that's really tough because we need those people to be cleared now, but it does take more personnel, more government employees, more contractors to kind of grease the skid, so to speak, and accelerate that process of clearance because it involves interviews of family and friends, background checks, have there been, are you in debt? What's your foreign travel like? So it's not just filling out the form. The government form is called SF-86, which I know sounds fascinating, but the challenge is to bring on more people to do more thorough and more extensive and quicker background checks that are still very, very effective. So one thing they could do is increase the funding to hire and bring on more people and increase the speed in which people's security clearances are either accepted or denied.
Do you think that this goes hand in hand with things like security checks for gun purchases?
A little bit. It's kind of a similar vein, but a separate issue. I mean, so one thing specific to background checks for owning a gun or a weapon. You remember there's a while ago, the Air Force did not report. There was an airman who was separated from kicked out of the Air Force, and he was able to get access to a gun because the Air Force did not transfer that information. So there's a lot of the information that, hey, this person was kicked out of the Air Force. He should not be able to buy a gun. And he was. And so he was also able to use that gun and kill people. So there's a kind of, in a way, similar to September 11th, just the issue of crosstalk between different levels of government agencies, whether it's a federal and state government or just one federal agency talking or communicating with another federal agency. So that kind of crosstalk and communication is still a challenge, but it's something that I think with the right time and the right plan that we can definitely improve upon. But so they're in a way related, but somewhat exclusive as well. But by increasing communication, that would help between the different federal agencies.
Are there other issues of national security that sort of keep you up at night?
There are a few. And I know some people may not want to hear it. Leaders in the military, Joint Chiefs of Staff, has said very clearly the number one threat to national security is global warming. Mm-hmm. So in this sense, if we can just put aside whether it exists or whether it is or it isn't, it is real. It is a thing. But the issue is the environment doesn't care whether or not we believe it's real or not. It is happening. So that's their number one concern. And the reason why is that as tides rise, as oceans rise, as more land is lost to global warming, that is a threat. But it's also a threat in the sense of what causes states to fail, what causes a nation to crumble. And so when the temperature changes and water levels change and all that can also create food shortages, water shortages, which causes instability, which also can cause more turmoil in, say, country X, and that we might have to respond to if it's a threat to our national security abroad. So that is a huge issue. We can do things to address that, but on the military level, the way that when I speak to people, because my district is fairly red, but I don't think it doesn't seem as drastic as what some people might say it is. But one way I kind of broach this subject is the United States Marine Corps. What they're doing is they are looking into technologies that can allow their Marines, so a group of Marines, to act more independently and autonomously. In layman's terms, they're not going to be as reliant upon logistics. So the most dangerous part of military missions typically are getting resupplied, whether that be water, food, energy, such as fuel or anything like that. So that is a very vulnerable part of military missions. So what the Marine Corps is looking into, hey, how can we have our Marines in austere environments act more independently and autonomously from logistical change? So if that is batteries that last longer, if that is solar-powered charging stations that are easily transported, then that's one thing that we can do to kind of break that logistical chain. What we would say is, hey, this is green energy, which turns people off. So what it really is national security. And so that's the way the Marine Corps brings it to Congress, is say, hey, look, this is going to help us. This is going to help defend the nation. This is going to help Marines. It's going to save lives. So that's the way I talk about it. It's not mincing words or changing the topic. It's like, hey, look, the Marine Corps is looking into this. And if we want to call it green energy, fine. But what they're pitching it as is this is an issue of national security. So the better that we're able to act independently of water and energy and food, et cetera, the better it's going to be for us and for the entire nation. So that's one way I try to bridge the gap between those who say global warming is not an issue. And I say, well, do you care about national security? Do you like the Marines? Oh, absolutely. Great. Well, here's what they're doing. And then they get excited about that. Plus, it's a great opportunity for us to continue research and development and pursue other ways to kind of push our technological capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, I'd prefer that everyone believed in climate change, but if saying this is national security issue will get them to go ahead with the technology, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because, one of the things I get asked a lot is, how are you going to work across the aisle? How are you going to reach out to people who have very different views than what I have? And I think that's one way. It's you're saying the same thing, but just in a different manner. And so in a way like, hey, I know this is what's important to them, and it's not being deceitful. It's just meeting them, I think, halfway, hopefully more than halfway, if that's what we need to do. As long as if the positive outcome from this is we reduce our impact on global warming, terrific. So in that sense, I don't really care how we get it done, as long as we get it done. And so if that's under national security, pushing renewable energy through the Marine Corps and other branches of service, fantastic. Let's do it. And that way we're getting the same thing accomplished kind of almost accidentally together. So yeah, I think it could be a very, very great thing.
So what are the other issues that the residents of the Missouri 2nd District are really concerned with?
One of them, the number one thing is healthcare. So it's not just the accessibility, it's the affordability of it. And so a lot of people have different ways of how they want to do that, but that has been almost consistently the number one thing. How can we pay for healthcare? And so the way it ties into defense is, well, we have to have citizens that are able to serve. The military does have a hard time getting people to do that, to enlist, to stay. I've been in now for over 10 years, so hooray. What started off as a 3-year hitch has now gone over 10. So, but healthcare is one thing. And I say that because whether it's the House or a governor or the United States Senate says we don't have the money to pay for it, it's simply not true. And the example I use is there's a jet called the F-35. It's a new stealth fighter. So long and short of it is, the concept was if we buy more of these things, just like anything else, it becomes cheaper. So the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and the Navy wanted this jet, this weapons platform, but this aircraft. But the issue is it's been very long in development and actually getting it out to the fight. But CRS, which is Congressional Research Service, and GAO, Government Accountability Office, if you haven't read the reports, I'm not even kidding. They're very, very well done, and they're extremely informative. And so I know that's like about the most wonkish thing I could say, but they're really fascinating. They estimate by the time this jet is fully implemented, it's going to cost $1 trillion. That's with a T. So $1 trillion, to put in perspective, is 1/21st of our national debt. And $1 trillion, to kind of give a pictorial sense, being an English major, if we stacked up $100 bills vertically, $1 trillion would go up over 67,000 miles high, and that's a quarter of the way to the moon. So when someone says we don't have money, I simply say that's not true. And so what I'm excited about is, having worked on the Armed Services Committee, having worked in Congress for 2 years, knowing where the money is, knowing how it can be spent better, but also saying, hey, look, we have $1 trillion. If we're spending $1 trillion on a jet, we can have money for healthcare for everybody, no matter who you are, no matter how much you earn, no matter of anything, no matter your gender, no matter your sexual orientation. It is possible. The real issue is, I wish Congress would say, we don't have the guts, or we're not going to put in we're not going to allocate funds correctly. I think that is a much more accurate response to why don't we have a healthcare system that works for everybody. The fact is they just don't have the guts, or they're not going to allocate funding, because the funding is there. They're just not prioritizing it correctly.
And so in a district that's sort of around St. Louis, are there issues that people are really worried about with things like race relations, gun violence, police shootings, things like that? Is that something that you've been hearing as you've been campaigning?
Yes. So gun violence, absolutely. And so it's long overdue. Race, it's on my website, shameless plug, markosmack.com. I do talk about race because it is an issue. Racial inequality and economic equality go hand in hand typically. And it is something that we have not addressed. And so the district I'm in is about 93% white. And so whenever I talk about race, I understand that people get uncomfortable, but that's okay. I'd rather people are uncomfortable when we actually get to the issues and starting addressing them, rather than me taking an easy line and just saying nothing, or just saying support police, which of course I do, but I don't think those two things are exclusionary. To support police is not at the cost of BLM, Black Lives Matter. It's not. So I don't buy into the kind of the dialogue of if you're for one, you're against the other, and vice versa. I don't think that's true. I think there is a way to bridge these two things. Racial inequality is real, even if it's not the most popular subject in the second district. I'm compelled to be unafraid to discuss that. The district, just to give you an idea, it is the wealthiest district in Missouri. It is the most well-educated in Missouri as far as people who have bachelor's degrees or higher. But even with that, basically being almost 93% white, there is, depending on where you're at, there are sections and areas where there are issues of economic inequality. So the southeast part, where I grew up for a bit, it's called Jefferson County, has two areas one called Fenton, one called Arnold. So I lived in a double-wide trailer for 5 years in Fenton. So what's important there is not going to be important. The same issues typically that are going to be important to the people making combined $250,000 in the western part of the district. So there are, even within this area, there are pretty big gaps of economic earnings. So working on messages that are true for both sides but resonate with both area or different parts of the areas is key. And it's something that I'm really excited about, and we've been, I think, doing a very, very good job of. So what's good for, one is typically going to be good for the other side. But gun violence, as you know, is a hot button issue right now. What I talk about is, hey, look, I've been to Afghanistan twice, and there's only one place for these types of weapons, and that's in Afghanistan or Iraq or a war zone, period. It's not for home defense. It's not for home security. It's not for self-defense. It's in a war zone. The example I use is the AR-15, for instance, which is a civilian version of the rifle that I'm issued, fires a 5.56 millimeter round. And the so what of that is it's designed to do two things. When it enters soft flesh, it fractures, so it breaks apart, and it tumbles. So it's not meant to kill outright. It's meant to kill slowly. If someone is wounded, you not only take that one person down, let's say in a combat zone, you have now taken two other people out of the fight too, because now they have two other people have to take that soldier or Marine out. So by hitting one, you can actually take three out, incidentally. So that's a tougher subject in some areas, but that's where I say, hey, have you been in the military? No. It's like, okay, well, I got this. I know what these weapons are used for. And just to give you a background, Missouri deer hunting laws say you cannot use that rifle. You can only have 10 rounds in your magazine. So you can only have 10 bullets in a rifle. So why that is used to preserve deer and not humans, I'll never know. But there are more restrictions on shooting deer than there are people. So that's something we're still trying to, communicate. And we're not taking people's guns away. We're like, hey, look, what do you really need? What is the purpose of this? So then that has worked to kind of bridge that gap as far as being in the Army for 10 years. And so that kind of gives more validity than if someone hadn't and only read one report and gone into an area and spoke about it. So I think it's one thing to talk about guns. It's another thing to have background and experience in them. And so I do want that fight. I do want that argument. I do want that discussion, hopefully, with people who feel a different way, that I'm not threatening the Second Amendment. I'm not taking away your guns. But hey, look, there's a better way to do this. If we're going to propose laws, if we're going to propose language, we have to know the language that never got out of committee and why. We have to know the language that has failed every single year in Congress. And we also have to know if we say, I want to get rid of extended magazines. Great. Or high capacity magazines. Well, we better know what a high capacity magazine is. And so if we just use these buzzwords, I'm telling you, the other side is going to say, well, what is that? And then they're going to expect us to have this